Hey, Nish here, and I currently live in Sevilla, one of the cities in Spain with the best cycling infrastructure, with over 180 kilometers of bike lanes, pretty much no rain and no hills. Lately, I've noticed a big increase in the use of personal e-scooters, and I wanted to make this video to compare e-scooters to bikes. I'm specifically talking about owning your own bike or scooter and not the various rental schemes that are available. So first off, and literally the prompt for me to try and make this video is, every time I see someone whiz past on a scooter, I do kind of think it's a missed opportunity to exercise. It's as if someone bought a healthy meal, dropped it on the floor, and then they were like, well, I'll just have to buy a burger now. Goes without saying that exercise is good for the body, and of course there's a lot of literature out there that shows that doing cycling is good for the heart and the body, and it lowers rates of things like cancer and cardiovascular issues. For me, it's also the ability to keep up in fitness, because I'm not much of an athlete, but by cycling around as my primary form of transport, I maintain a decent level of cardio without having to go to the gym and do a cardio session. In contrast, obviously, standing stationary on a scooter isn't going to apport the same health benefits, and I think, for me, that's a point in favor of the bikes. The second topic I want to talk about is environmental impacts. Obviously, both modes of transport are great because they're pollution-free and relatively green, but how do they compare? So I was looking into scooters and their CO2 impact to the environment, and I found a widely cited letter that came up with the figure of 200 grams of CO2 per kilometer traveled over the life cycle of a rental scooter. So this 200 grams needs to be broken down because 80 of that actually comes from the trucks driving around, taking these rental scooters around the place. So we can take that off because we're considering privately owned scooters. So we could come to a figure of about 120 grams of CO2 per kilometer traveled. This further breaks down 100 from the manufacturer and 20 from the electricity use. So theoretically, that electricity use could reduce, but we will consider that full 120 for the moment. So how does that compare to a bike? Well, I found some different figures for the carbon intensity of the manufacturer of a bike, and I found that that's between 100 and 200 kilograms. So let's take 200 kilograms, the higher estimate. Now, I did find a Bike Radar article that was trying to calculate all of this in much more detail than I'm going to do now. They had down an 18,000 kilometer lifespan, which I thought was pretty high. So we're going to work with, let's say, 4,500 kilometer lifespan. That's a quarter of that. And I think if you do use a bike regularly, you can clock up that kind of distance in a couple of years. This gives us a carbon intensity of a bike of about 45 grams of CO2 per kilometer, which is much lower than the 120 we just mentioned. So essentially, if you use a bike for a decent lifespan, it has a pretty good chance, I think, of being a bit more environmentally friendly than an e-scooter. And then there's the topic of recycling. So e-scooters are yet another source of e-waste, particularly the batteries. They're going to be what actually affects the lifespan of the scooter you have, unless you can change that battery out. Whereas with a bike, you do have to replace parts every now and then, but at least everything is actually pretty reusable, or you can at least scrap it for metal. Now, there might be someone watching thinking, but what about all the extra calories you burn while cycling and all the extra food you need to eat to make up for that? It was interesting that Bike Radar article actually did a calculation on this and came up with a figure of an extra 16 grams of CO2 per kilometer based on the extra food eaten. But of course, that's going to vary very much on your diet. But just thought it was interesting. It still keeps it below the intensity of a scooter. So aside from health and environment, there are also practical aspects that we need to consider. And I'll admit, this is where I think there's points on both sides of the debate. So the first thing is the obvious one. You don't always want to be doing exercise, especially if you live in a hot place or that has hills. You don't want to arrive sweaty everywhere, and for that reason a scooter could be better. There's also the fact that some people will get a lot of active things in their work, for example, and so if they're commuting, they don't want to do yet more exercise and active stuff to get to and from. The other thing is speed. Scooters typically have a maximum speed of 25 kilometers per hour, or around 15 miles an hour, and this is probably going to be quicker than a bike unless you have a very nice light city or road bike and you like to go very fast, which I probably put myself in that camp. But I would say typically a scooter is going to end up being about 20 to 25% faster. Both are still much quicker than walking though. Then there's elements of convenience. So you typically see more people locking up bikes than locking up e-scooters. Now, I don't know if it's tricky to lock up an e-scooter. It does seem like people tend to haul them into the places they're going rather than lock them up. With a bike, it's pretty simple. You get a nice D-lock or a chain and you can usually attach it to whatever you want, like a lamppost or anything. There is the benefit of the scooters though. They fold down, they're a little bit more compact, and it's probably easier to store them where you live. But then jumping back with another point for the bikes is the accessories you can have for them. So you can put a rack on a bike, you can carry luggage, you can put a basket. Now, it is theoretically possible to carry stuff on a scooter. You sometimes see people hanging stuff from the handlebars, but I think it seems a lot more unstable, and it's certainly not recommended to have too much weight on there. Along the same lines, bikes that are, say, hybrid or mountain bikes are much more versatile. So you can actually take them off-road, take them on trails, whereas you wouldn't want to be caught out in the middle of nowhere with a little scooter. But one last point that I can give to the e-scooters is, while it is very ill-advised, you can carry more than one passenger, which could be useful in a pinch, but probably quite dangerous. Speaking of danger, which mode of transport is safer? So in my personal experience, I find scooters seem a little more dangerous. So one of the things is the steering is very twitchy, and also the small wheels. I think they don't cope as well with changes in surfaces, bumps and things like that. I did try and look for research in the area. I found one article that compared the collision rates for bikes and e-scooters in certain zones in the UK where they were testing rental e-scooters. They did find that there was 5 times less collisions with the scooters than the bikes, though I don't know, there's probably a lot of factors. Maybe they were already in a zone where there's very good infrastructure. There was another study out of Finland, on the contrary, which found that e-scooters had much more injuries than bikes or motorbikes, though they did cite substance use being part of the equation. Essentially, people getting drunk on a night out and then trying to stumble their way back home on one of these scooters. That study actually led to them trialing a ban of e-scooters after midnight to cope with it. But again, it seems to be more related to the driver than the mode of transport on its own. So I'd be curious what you guys think. Let me know in the comments, which mode of transport do you think is inherently safer or more dangerous? And the last thing is cost. Now, a scooter is going to cost you around 250, maybe 300 euros tops, whereas a used bike, a nice one, you could find for maybe 100, 150 euros. I think bikes maybe have a bit more maintenance costs associated because there's more moving parts like the chain, the tires, the inner tube, etc. But I still think a bike ends up being cheaper. So there you have it. Bikes are cheaper, probably better for your health, probably better for the environment, in some aspects more convenient. So for me, bikes do win, but I fully appreciate that for some people in terms of accessibility and abilities, a scooter is much more appropriate. I'd be very curious to hear how you weigh this up and what side of the debate you're on. So let me know in the comments. Subscribe for more To The Point content, and I'll catch you in the next one.